Pour the rest. Vanessa Laurent emptied the entire container of white paint over the curvy maid's head. Clara Hayes didn't scream. She stood frozen beneath the dripping white paint as the mafia boss's fiancé accused her of destroying a $300,000 portrait out of jealousy. Then Damian Bellucci walked in. Exceptionally handsome, terrifyingly controlled, Damian commanded one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the East Coast, and a legitimate empire worth billions. Everyone expected him to defend his fiancée. Instead, Clara raised one paint-covered hand. Between her fingers was a memory card. Vanessa's face changed. "Give me that." Damian looked at her. He had never told Vanessa the card existed. So how did she know what Clara was holding? Silence swallowed the room. White paint slid from Clara's dark hair, down her cheeks, and onto the marble beneath her shoes. Around her, household staff and several guests stood motionless, trapped between embarrassment and fear. Vanessa recovered first. "She destroyed the portrait," she said, her voice controlled enough to sound almost reasonable. "I found her behind it, with the frame pulled away from the wall." Clara wiped paint from one eye. "I didn't destroy it." Vanessa gave a thin smile. "Of course not. A $300,000 custom portrait simply damaged itself." No one laughed. Vanessa turned toward the witnesses, as if presenting evidence before a jury. "She's been working around people with things she could never afford for years. Perhaps eventually resentment becomes difficult to hide. That hurt more than Clara wanted it to. Not because she envied Vanessa, because Vanessa had reduced 2 years of honest work to proof of inferiority. Clara could have shouted. She could have reminded everyone how often she had cleaned up after guests who never learned her name, or how many times Vanessa had spoken about servants while standing 3 feet from one. Instead, Clara tightened her fingers around the memory card. Damian noticed. He noticed everything now. At 41, Damian Bellucci had built his reputation on that ability. Men with political influence measured their words around him. Business executives waited weeks for meetings his assistants could cancel in seconds. Hundreds of people operated beneath his authority, legally and otherwise. Yet he did not raise his voice. "What happened to the portrait?" The question was directed at Clara. Vanessa stiffened. Clara answered carefully. "I was asked to inspect the wall before the portrait was moved. The frame looked wrong." "Wrong how?" "The backing had been opened." Vanessa interrupted. "She is a maid, Damian." His eyes shifted toward his fiancée. "And one word." Vanessa fell silent. Clara continued. "The seal behind the frame had been replaced badly. Someone opened it recently. When I checked the damaged section, I found this hidden behind the backing." She lifted the memory card slightly. For the first time, Damian looked directly at Clara rather than through her. He knew her face. He knew she had worked in his home for nearly 2 years. He realized, with sudden irritation at himself, that he knew almost nothing else. Vanessa stepped forward. "That proves nothing. Give me the card." She should be searched before she hides anything else. Clara's gaze moved to her. Damian's did too. Something in the room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but every person present felt it. Damian turned fully toward Vanessa. "Why?" Vanessa blinked. "Why what? Why should she hide anything else?" "Because she obviously took the card." "I found it," Clara said. Vanessa ignored her. "Damian, this is absurd. Take it from her." Damian did not move. His expression had become unreadable. "What do you think is on it?" For the first time, Vanessa hesitated. Only half a second. But Damian Bellucci had built an empire by noticing half seconds. "I don't know." "Then why are you so concerned about getting it?" Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out quickly enough. Damian looked at the memory card between Clara's paint-covered fingers, then at the damaged portrait, then back at the woman he was supposed to marry. His voice remained quiet. Nobody leaves. The doors were closed, and suddenly, Clara was no longer the person in the room everyone was looking down on. She was the person holding the one thing everyone wanted explained. Damien had the memory card examined on a secured computer that had never touched the estate's network. Clara waited in a nearby study, still wearing a borrowed robe over paint-stained clothes. No one had questioned her like a criminal. No one had searched her. Damien had simply asked her to remain available because she was the only person who could explain exactly how the card had been found. 20 minutes later, one of Damien's security specialists gave him the preliminary result. The card contained photographs and partial scans of confidential documents, property acquisition schedules, private valuation reports, preliminary ownership structures connected to several commercial developments. None involved the criminal side of Damien's empire. Nothing on the card could destroy the Bellucci organization. But that almost made the discovery more disturbing. Someone had been quietly collecting information about legitimate assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Not stealing. Collecting. Leverage, Damien thought. Someone was preparing for a future argument they intended to win. He returned to Clara. "Show me exactly what you saw." They went back to the portrait. The room had been cleared, except for security personnel, and Rosa Bellucci, Damien's 69-year-old aunt, who had arrived after hearing a version of events so exaggerated that, according to her, it included 3 destroyed paintings and an attempted poisoning. Rosa took one look at Clara's paint-streaked hair. "I see accuracy remains an endangered species in this house." Clara almost smiled. Then she crouched beside the removed portrait. The paper seal here was cut. Damien studied it. He saw damage. Clara saw a sequence. "This section was replaced," she explained. "Different adhesive, slightly different paper weight. Whoever opened it tried to make the repair look old." "You noticed that while cleaning?" Clara glanced up. "I wasn't cleaning the painting. I was checking the wall before the staff moved it." She pointed toward one corner. The frame was sitting unevenly. "When I checked why, I noticed the backing." Damien frowned. "How did you know what to look for?" A brief silence followed. Clara seemed surprised by the question. "I studied art conservation and archival documentation." Damien stared at her. "You studied conservation?" "For a while," Rosa answered before Clara could minimize it. "Nearly 3 years." Damien looked between them. "You knew?" "Clara told me 2 years ago." Rosa's expression suggested the real question was why he had not known. Clara spared him the discomfort of asking it. "My mother became ill. I left college, and after she died, there were medical debts. Household work offered stable pay." There was no shame in her voice. No plea for sympathy. Just facts. Damien looked at the woman who had moved quietly through his estate for nearly 2 years. "I didn't know." Clara met his eyes. "You never asked." The words were not cruel. That made them worse. Damien knew the histories of men who managed operations across entire cities. He knew which executives could be trusted with $50 million and which required 3 signatures before moving 50,000. Yet a woman had worked inside his own home for nearly 2 years, and the only facts he could have offered about her were her name and position. He had mistaken familiarity for knowledge. Damien looked back at the portrait. Could there be others? Other cards? Other places someone accessed this way? Clara considered the question, rather than rushing to impress him. "Possibly, but I can't tell you who did it." "I didn't ask you to." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "I'm asking what you actually know." Something in her posture relaxed. Clara examined the damaged backing again. If the same person used framed artwork or archival storage to hide material elsewhere, I might recognize similar tampering. Might. Not would. Damien noticed the distinction. People around him usually exaggerated their usefulness. Clara seemed determined not to. Behind them, Vanessa appeared at the doorway, with one of Damien's security men beside her. I assume this ridiculous misunderstanding is finished. Damien turned. No, her expression tightened. The card contains confidential Bellucci documents. For one instant, Vanessa became perfectly still. Then came the expected denial. I have no idea how they got there. Damien watched her carefully. I didn't say you did. Another half-second. Another hesitation. Small enough for almost anyone to miss. Almost. He turned back to Clara. I want you to help identify anything else that may have been tampered with. Clara glanced toward Vanessa, then toward the security personnel. As a witness? Damien understood the question beneath the question. Not a suspect. Not a prisoner. Not a servant being ordered beyond her job. As someone who knows what to look for. Clara nodded once. All right. Damien looked at the damaged seal again. The memory card had given him one problem. The woman who found it had given him another. He had spent years believing that power meant knowing exactly what existed inside his world. Now he was beginning to wonder how much had been standing directly in front of him, unnoticed. By the next morning, 3 more pieces of artwork had been removed from their walls. None contained another memory card. That disappointed Damien's security team. Clara considered it useful. If someone hid something once, she explained, examining the backing of a 19th century landscape, that doesn't mean they used the same hiding place twice. Damien stood beside her. So we've learned nothing. We've learned your criminal organization has more patience than you do. Silence. Clara froze. She had meant to think that sentence. Rosa, seated across the room with a cup of tea, lowered it very slowly. 2 security men suddenly found the floor fascinating. Damien looked at Clara. Most people apologized when they accidentally challenged him. Clara cleared her throat. I could rephrase that. Would it become less accurate? Probably not. Then don't. Rosa hid a smile behind her cup. The search continued. Clara never pretended to know more than she did. She could identify disturbed seals, replaced backing paper, unusual adhesive, and subtle changes suggesting that frames or archival boxes had been opened recently. Security handled everything else. Access records, camera footage, staff schedules, electronic logs. Damien noticed that Clara repeatedly gave his investigators small pieces of information they had not thought to ask for. The portrait containing the memory card had been moved 6 weeks earlier for electrical repairs. A storage room lock had been replaced around the same time. One private corridor had been temporarily accessible to guests during preparations for a charity event. How do you remember all that? Damien asked. Clara shrugged. I work here. So do 63 other people. Yes, but most of them have departments. And you? I have eyes. That answer stayed with him. Over the next several days, Damien began noticing how much those eyes saw. A kitchen assistant received a phone call and abruptly left her station. Before the supervisor could complain, Clara quietly rearranged the cleaning schedule to cover her. Her son has asthma, Clara explained when Damien asked. School called. Another employee nearly missed an important delivery because of a scheduling error. Clara already knew. She had corrected it. She remembered whose mother was recovering from surgery, which gardener was studying for a licensing exam, and which new housekeeper was terrified of breaking antique glassware. She seemed to carry an invisible map of the household in her head. Not merely rooms, people. Damien had spent years building systems designed to tell him everything. Clara had built none. She simply paid attention. You notice an unusual amount, he said that afternoon. Clara glanced at him. People talk around household staff. Why? Because they assume we're furniture. Damien's expression hardened slightly. Do I do that? She could have lied. Most people would have. Sometimes. The answer surprised a laugh out of Rosa from across the room. Damien looked toward his aunt. "You appear to be enjoying this investigation. Only the educational portions." Clara suddenly became very interested in the frame she was examining. Later, she found a second disturbed backing. There was nothing hidden inside, but the adhesive matched the poorly repaired seal from the original portrait. That gave security something concrete. Both pieces had passed through the same temporary storage room during separate events. "You were right," Damien said. Clara looked up. "About the adhesive. About looking for patterns instead of another card. Oh, you have an exceptional eye for detail." Clara, who had stood covered in paint before a room full of wealthy strangers without crying, became visibly uncomfortable. "It's mostly training. And ability." She looked away. "We should probably check the inventory records." Damien stared at her. "Did you just change the subject?" "No, you did. I redirected us toward operational efficiency." From the doorway, Rosa made a suspicious sound that might have been a cough. Damien looked at his aunt. Rosa looked innocently at the ceiling. Clara closed the archival box with slightly more concentration than necessary. For the first time in years, Damien found himself amused inside an investigation involving a breach of his private security. That should have concerned him. Instead, he began looking forward to Clara's observations. She, meanwhile, was discovering something equally inconvenient. Damien Bellucci was frightening. There was no pretending otherwise. Men twice Clara's size straightened when he entered a room. Security personnel responded to quiet instructions with an urgency other men required shouting to achieve. But he listened, actually listened. When Clara said she did not know something, he never pressured her to invent certainty. When she disagreed, he asked why. The contradiction unsettled her more than the reputation. A monster would have been easier to understand. A controlled, intelligent man who occasionally looked at her as though her opinion genuinely mattered, was considerably more dangerous. By the fourth day, security had narrowed the suspicious access to a small group of people who had been present during both periods when the affected artwork had been moved. People with privileged access. People no ordinary employee could casually question. The investigation was getting closer. That evening, Clara handed Damien her notes. Their fingers nearly touched. She pulled hers back too quickly. Damien noticed. Clara noticed that he noticed. Neither said anything. She wished him good night and walked away. Damien remained where he was. 2 years. For nearly 2 years, Clara Hayes had crossed rooms he occupied, solved problems inside his home, and quietly observed a world that barely acknowledged her. He had seen the uniform. He had known the name. He had never noticed the woman. Now, for the first time, Damien watched Clara until she disappeared around the corner. Rosa appeared beside him. She said nothing. Damien slowly turned his head. "Don't. I said nothing. You were about to." Rosa smiled. "That seems to be troubling you more than if I had." Then she walked away. Damien remained alone, staring at the empty corridor. For once, his aunt was wrong. What troubled him was that he already knew exactly what she had noticed. Vanessa noticed the change before Damien admitted it to himself. It was not the way he looked at Clara. Not yet. It was something Vanessa considered far more dangerous. He listened to her. During a security review 2 days later, Clara pointed out that one of the disturbed frames had been moved twice, according to household records, while the official access report listed only one relocation. Damien immediately stopped the discussion. "Check both dates." His security chief did. Clara was right. Again. Vanessa sat at the far end of the table, perfectly composed. For years, she had understood influence as a kind of architecture. Birth. Money. Connections. Beauty. Access. Those things determined whose voice mattered. Clara Hayes possessed none of them. Yet a woman in a household uniform could now speak one quiet sentence and redirect Damian Bellucci's entire security team. Vanessa waited until the meeting ended. Clara. The room slowed. Clara turned. Vanessa smiled pleasantly. You've become remarkably involved in all this. I was asked to help. Of course. The softness of Vanessa's tone made the insult sharper. I only wonder whether this investigation still requires quite so much of your personal attention. Clara understood immediately. So did everyone else. Vanessa continued. You've spent more time with Damian this week than some of his senior executives. Damian, still reviewing a document, looked up. Clara remained calm. If my assistance is no longer useful, I'm happy to return to my regular duties. That isn't what I meant. I think it is. Vanessa's smile tightened. I simply wouldn't want anyone to misunderstand your enthusiasm. There it was. Not an accusation. Something more elegant. A suggestion. That Clara enjoyed the attention. That perhaps the investigation had become an excuse to remain close to a powerful man. That a maid invited temporarily into important rooms might begin imagining she belonged there. Clara could have defended herself. Instead, she placed the folder she was holding on the table. Then I'll withdraw. Damian's gaze shifted to her. Vanessa had not expected that. Neither had he. Clara continued quietly. Your security team already has my notes. If my presence is creating questions about the investigation, there's no reason for me to remain involved. She meant it. Damian could see that immediately. No performance. No attempt to make him ask her to stay. She was already stepping away from the table. Clara. She stopped. Damian closed the document in front of him. You're remaining. Vanessa's expression cooled. Damian. He did not raise his voice. Clara identified evidence my security team missed because she has relevant expertise. She remains involved for the same reason I keep anyone involved. His eyes moved around the room, because they are useful to the truth. Then he looked directly at Vanessa. Her job title does not make her evidence less valuable. Silence followed. Clara felt something unexpected. Not gratitude for being rescued. Something deeper. He had not called her unfortunate. He had not praised himself for defending a maid. He had not offered charity. He had defended the value of her judgment. Vanessa folded her hands. So this has nothing to do with personal interest. The question was aimed at Damian now. His answer came immediately. No. Clara looked down. Damian did not. But several seconds later, after Vanessa had left the room, he became aware of an inconvenient problem. He had answered too quickly, because the investigation was not personal. Clara's expertise was relevant. Both statements were true, but Vanessa had asked something slightly different. Personal interest. Damian's eyes moved toward Clara. She was organizing the documents, apparently determined not to look at him. He noticed the curve of her cheek, the concentration in her expression, a faint streak of blue ink on one finger, and suddenly, the answer he had given with absolute certainty felt less accurate. Clara glanced up. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Small, unspoken, immediately understood. Clara returned to the papers. So, she said, too casually, the second access date. Damian almost smiled. Another strategic redirection. This time, he allowed it. Across the room, Rosa had witnessed everything. She lifted one eyebrow. Damian caught it. His expression warned her not to begin. Rosa merely gathered her handbag. I'm leaving. Good. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. Rosa smiled at Clara on her way out. Vanessa had believed Clara's growing influence came from proximity to Damian. She had misunderstood the problem. Clara had influence because when she spoke, she was usually worth listening to. And Damien was beginning to understand something even more dangerous. Clara had never fought to enter his world. She had never asked for his money, his protection, his attention, or his approval. When accused of wanting access to him, her first instinct had been to walk away. For a man surrounded by people constantly trying to become indispensable, that should have made Clara easier to dismiss. Instead, Damien found himself wanting her to stay. The answer came 48 hours later, not from another hidden memory card, from access records. Once Damien's security team compared the dates Clara had identified with guest logs, temporary room permissions, and internal document access, a pattern emerged. Vanessa had been present every time. That alone proved nothing. Then they found the copies. Several confidential property files had been photographed from a private terminal using credentials temporarily issued to Vanessa's office during preparations for the marriage. The files matched documents stored on the memory card. Damien read the final report twice. Then he asked Vanessa to join him. Clara was present only because several details in the report depended on the tampering she had identified. Vanessa entered composed. She remained composed even when Damien placed the report on the table. You copied confidential information. It was not a question. Vanessa looked at the evidence. Yes. Clara had expected denial. Damien apparently had too. His face revealed nothing. Why? Vanessa slowly removed her gloves and placed them beside the report. Because I was going to marry a man who controls everything. Her voice remained steady. Your companies, your properties, your accounts, your security, even the lawyers preparing our marriage documents, ultimately answer to interests connected to you. So you collected leverage. I created protection. Without telling me. Would you have allowed it if I had? No. Exactly. For the first time, Clara understood something uncomfortable. Vanessa's fear was not entirely irrational. Marrying Damien Bellucci meant entering a world where his power dwarfed almost everyone else's. But fear did not explain the paint. It did not excuse destroying someone else to protect a secret. Damien seemed to reach the same conclusion. You could have refused to marry me. Vanessa's expression sharpened. That is easy for you to say. You never enter a room with less power than the person waiting inside it. Her eyes moved toward Clara. Well, almost never. Damien ignored the implication. You found out Clara discovered the card. Vanessa said nothing, and before she could explain what she found, you accused her of destroying the portrait. Still nothing. You poured paint over her in front of witnesses because you needed everyone to see a jealous, incompetent maid before they saw a credible witness. Vanessa's silence became the answer. Then she looked directly at Clara. And now what? Clara did not respond. Vanessa gave a quiet, humorless laugh. 2 years in this house, practically invisible. Then suddenly Damien discovers you have a brain, and now you're sitting in private meetings while my engagement is being interrogated. Vanessa, Damien warned. No, let's at least be honest. Her composure finally cracked, not into hysteria, but bitterness. You are prepared to destroy an alliance between two powerful families because you prefer believing her. Clara stood. Every eye turned toward her. She could have defended herself. She could have listed every insult. She could have enjoyed the reversal. Instead, she looked at Damien. I never asked you to choose between us. Then she left the room. Damien watched the door close. Vanessa mistook his silence for uncertainty. Damien, think carefully. He turned back to her. I have. Something in his voice changed her expression. The engagement is over. Vanessa stared at him. You cannot be serious. I am. Our families have announcements prepared. Contracts are being negotiated. Cancel them. My father can call me. You would throw away everything over a maid. No. The single word stopped her. Damien stepped closer to the table. I am ending this because the woman I intended to marry secretly collected confidential information to use as leverage against me. He removed the engagement documents from the folder. And when an innocent employee discovered evidence of it, you tried to destroy her credibility before she could speak. Vanessa went pale. Damien remained calm. That made what followed worse. Her access to Bellucci properties would be revoked. Her credentials would be terminated. All pending joint business arrangements under Damien's authority would end. She would have no place in his inner circle. No future influence over the Bellucci empire. No position as Mrs. Bellucci. Everything Vanessa had treated as inevitable disappeared in less than a minute. No shouting. No threats. No revenge. Just closed doors. You'll regret humiliating my family. Damien's expression did not change. This is not humiliation. He looked at the report. It is consequence. Vanessa understood then. The future she had believed she already owned was gone. She had poured paint over Clara because she thought hierarchy guaranteed that no one would question her version of events. Instead, the woman she considered socially insignificant had exposed the one thing Vanessa valued most: her certainty that status would always protect her. Damien did not order anyone to drag her away. He did not need to. Vanessa picked up her gloves. For the first time since Clara had known her, she walked out of the Bellucci estate with no authority over what happened next. Damien remained alone beside the table. The engagement was finished. But as his thoughts turned toward Clara, one fact became immediately clear. Ending his future with Vanessa did not give him a future with Clara. And Clara Hayes was the last woman in the world who would accept being treated as someone's replacement. By the following morning, everyone in the Bellucci household knew the engagement was over. By lunchtime, half of them had apparently decided why. Clara heard the first whisper in the laundry corridor. She heard the second near the kitchen. By evening, someone had already transformed an investigation involving confidential property records into a romantic scandal in which Clara had somehow seduced one of the most powerful men on the East Coast while covered in white paint. She found Damien in his study. "We have a problem." He looked up immediately. "What happened?" "Apparently I'm going to marry you." Silence. Damien Bellucci, who had negotiated with men capable of collapsing entire companies without visibly reacting, appeared to lose access to language for approximately 2 seconds. Clara folded her arms. "I thought you should know." "I see. Do you?" "No." Despite herself, Clara almost smiled. Then her expression became serious. "This is exactly what I don't want." Damien understood. To everyone else, Vanessa's departure had created an empty position. And people were already trying to place Clara inside it, as if her entire story could be reduced to one woman losing Damien and another woman winning him. "You won't be treated that way," he said. "You can't control what everyone thinks." "I can control what happens in my house." That sentence is exactly the problem. Damien went still. Clara softened her tone. "You've been fair to me, more than fair since this started, but I don't want people looking at me and wondering whether every opportunity I get came because Damien Bellucci noticed me." That afternoon, Damien offered her formal compensation for the public humiliation, the ruined personal belongings, the circumstances surrounding the investigation. Clara reviewed the amount and accepted only what she believed was legitimately owed. Then Damien made a second offer. "I can fund the rest of your education." Clara looked at him. No. He had expected hesitation, not immediate refusal. "You haven't heard the details." "I don't need them. It would cover tuition, training, housing." "Damien." He stopped. Clara chose her words carefully. "If you were only my employer, maybe I could treat that as professional sponsorship." Something shifted between them. "And I'm not?" he asked. "That's becoming complicated." Neither moved. Clara looked away first. "If I accept something that changes my entire life, from a man I might have feelings for, then I'll spend years wondering where gratitude ends and everything else begins." Damien could have solved the problem in minutes. A foundation, an anonymous grant, a phone call to an institution that would never dare refuse him. For most of his life, power had made helping people simple. He was beginning to understand that sometimes using power was the selfish choice. "All right," he said. Clara looked surprised. "That's it? You said no." "I did. So the answer is no." For some reason, that affected her more than the offer itself. Rosa found another path. Weeks later, she arrived with information about an independent conservation scholarship and a professional training program Clara qualified for, based on her previous academic record. "No Bellucci money," Rosa said. Clara narrowed her eyes. "Did Damien arrange this?" "No." "Did he ask you to?" "No." "Did he threaten an admissions committee?" Rosa looked offended. "Clara, please, if my nephew had interfered, there would be a building named after you by breakfast." Clara laughed. She applied, on her own record, with her own references, and she was accepted. Damien did nothing. It was one of the hardest useful things he had ever done. 2 months later, Clara left domestic service. Her final day at the estate was strangely ordinary. No dramatic farewell, no grand declaration. She returned her keys, hugged several staff members, thanked Rosa, and stood across from Damien in the entrance hall. "So," she said, "you'll have to find someone else to insult your organizational patience. I have 63 employees, none with my qualifications. That is becoming increasingly obvious." She smiled. Then she left. Only afterward did Damien understand how much space one quiet person could occupy. He missed her dry comments during serious conversations. He missed the way she noticed when someone was uncomfortable before anyone else did. He missed being told when he was wrong without a committee first calculating the political consequences. Most of all, he missed the fact that Clara had never wanted anything from him except to be treated as if her dignity existed before he entered the room. For the first time since meeting her, Damien had no authority over Clara Hayes. She did not work for him. She did not depend on his money. There was no investigation keeping them together. No scandal. No obligation. He could no longer summon her into a room. If he wanted to see her again, Damien Bellucci, the man accustomed to controlling almost every variable in his world, would have to do something remarkably unfamiliar. He would have to ask. Several months later, Clara was working in a conservation studio when she received a request concerning a historically important Bellucci family painting. She read the name twice. Then she called Damien. "You own several hotels, a construction empire, and apparently enough influence to make grown men nervous by entering a room. That sounds exaggerated." "It isn't. You could hire any conservator you wanted." "I could." Clara smiled despite herself. "So why me?" There was a pause. Months earlier, Damien might have hidden behind practicality. This time, he did not. "Because I wanted to see you." When they met, Clara was no longer wearing a household uniform. She had her own work, her own future. Nothing about her life required Damien Bellucci's permission. And for once, Damien had no position of authority to hide behind. He asked her to dinner, not as her employer, not as her protector, simply as a man asking a woman who was entirely free to refuse him. Clara looked at him for a moment. "I'd like that." His eyes dropped toward her hand. A tiny spot of white restoration paint remained beneath one fingernail. Clara caught him staring. Is the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast traumatized by paint now? Only when someone is holding a bucket, She laughed. Months earlier, Vanessa had poured paint over Clara because she believed a maid could be humiliated without consequence. The paint washed away. The uniform eventually disappeared. But what that moment revealed remained. Vanessa lost the future she believed status guaranteed her. Damien finally saw the woman he had overlooked, and Clara stepped into a life where her worth no longer depended on whether powerful people noticed it. Damien did not fall in love because Clara needed saving. He fell in love after finally seeing what had always been there. Being overlooked had never made Clara ordinary. It only meant everyone else had failed to look closely enough.